From the Carter Subaru Studios, this is the Gee and Ursula Show with G. Scott and Ursula Royteen.
Good morning. Happy Wednesday, and thank you for listening to the Gee and Ursula Show. The state Supreme Court is considering a case that would affect whether cities can tow homeless RVs and cars. Well, coming up at 10:30, as someone who's lived in his car before, I have a strong opinion about this topic right here. But right now, Ursula, we have a guest.
We do. He's someone who served as Seattle's mayor for 5 days back in 2017. That was after 12 years as a member of the Seattle City Council. Bruce Harrell is very aware of the city's huge problems, but still he wants another crack at becoming Seattle's mayor again. And Bruce joins us now on the Gee and Ursula Show. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. So this is mostly tongue-in-cheek, but I want to know, why do you want to become Seattle's mayor?
Well, there's a great opportunity. I mean, when I was born in this city. I've been here my entire life, and I got to tell you, I look around and I am just totally devastated in what I see in so many parts of our society. And so, I gravitate toward taking on a challenge and building teams around me, smarter people than me, people that work hard and can keep my pace. And we got to put significant change agents in place to revitalize our city. I'm quite disappointed in a city that I love so much.
And talk about the things that you see, and I will be in full agreement. I've lived in this city for 32 years, and I've never felt so depressed about it. And I love it so much. So it is hard to see. But what are you seeing that has changed since you've been on the city council?
Sure. Well, it's two things. It's what you see and what you feel. And what I see are boarded up buildings. I see people living in cars and living under bridges and around parks. I see encampments everywhere. What I feel is hopelessness and despair. I see and feel finger pointing and divisiveness. And so the culture and the narrative is not a good one. And this is a city that, again, my grandparents came here for hope and prosperity and opportunity. And so it's both what I see and what I feel. And, I'm a positive, glass is always very full kind of person, but even someone with this level of optimism would say we have to put in the hard work. We have to come up with creative ideas, and I put a lot of ideas on my website on what we can do to change things. So I'm pretty excited about it. Where some may see despair, I see hope.
There was a lot of things, of course, that have taken place over this last year. Of course, we're going through a global pandemic, and a lot of cities have been hit hard, in particular our downtown Seattle corridor down there. But during your time away from city government, what was that one thing that made you say, okay, enough's enough, I'm jumping back in? I know there's multiple things, but what's that one story, something that happened during the course of 2020, something that happened that made you really get fired up to get back into this thing?
Well, I have to tell you that my campaign consultants will kill me because they keep saying, Bruce, come up with that one aha, that one epiphany. And I have to say, I'm a very authentic person, and there just wasn't one thing. During this summer, I was passing out literally hundreds and hundreds, possibly thousands of masks, talking to people like me that have been around for a while. And so there was a series of conversations. I, like many Americans, watched the George Floyd brutal situation in Minneapolis and saw how people who are ordinarily on the sidelines on race issues said, this should not happen in our country. I walked downtown with my wife, and we saw building after building that we used to take our kids to boarded up. So it was more a culmination of, is this the Seattle that I've been my entire life? So I can't say there was this one epiphany. It was just a culmination of depressive sightings and feelings, and again, getting literally hundreds of calls from people like me that said, Bruce, you got to step in. This is our time. And they didn't say, Bruce, I'm going to point the finger at you. They said, Bruce, you're very good at building teams. Let's do this.
You brought up the George Floyd conversation, and especially what we have seen, the reaction to that horrific incident that happened across the country. So let's talk specifically about police relationships. Can you express your view of defund the police and reimagining police? Where do you sit at with that? Can you explain that?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. So defunding the police is never my narrative. And so what I try to ask those that would say defund the police, I would ask the question, having a background in organizational design and improvement, when you're trying to improve an organization or a department, you're trying to get them to be more effective, and you're looking at efficiencies and operational efficiencies, when do you starve it of resources that doesn't fit into the model? What you do is you make sure that they have the tools to succeed, the training to succeed, and most importantly, the culture to succeed. So my emphasis on my platform is simply to build the relationships, the informal leaders in an organization, to reestablish the cultural norms. I say repeatedly yesterday during our kickoff, our police department under my leadership will be the masters of de-escalation. And if we just yell at the top of our lungs on what happened to George Floyd, perhaps we have to vent that. But then after the yelling dies down, what policies, what culture changes do we implement here? I believe I had several police officers at my event yesterday. I have friends I went to high school with and college with that are police officers. I have relatives who are police officers. So I don't bash the police officers. That just doesn't get us to where we're going. So my narrative is completely different. I want this entire city from all communities to be proud of our police department.
And you had said something specifically about what you talk about de-escalation. You talk specifically about what you want. You would hope that each officer would do, a pledge that they would make. Talk about that.
So there's no amount of training that can just change a culture. And on the George Floyd video, I've had some of my friends that are politically to my left and politically to my right, friends from all demographics look at that and just say, that is just wrong. That is inhumane. And I said, if we could establish that as a baseline, regardless as to your political leanings, if we could establish that as a baseline, now let's have a dialogue about why it was wrong and what we can do to prevent it. And I think that on a very human nature, if I can't have that baseline understanding on that one incident, then I don't know if I could train this officer to understand the fears and concerns that a lot of people of color have. And quite candidly, in a culture, when you are changing a culture, you have to reestablish cultural norms. So quite candidly, I don't think there's room for a police department for someone that can't at least have that baseline understanding. Because then I would ask them, why did you choose a profession where your goal is to protect and serve in all communities of all colors and to treat people with kindness and compassion? Mm-hmm. Why did you choose that as a profession? So I'd like to establish a baseline understanding, and I think to a large extent that may alleviate a lot of the frustration that people are very angry about today.
Bruce, another thing that we talk about just about every day on the show is our homelessness crisis, one that was declared, an emergency years ago, yet it seems to keep getting worse, especially during the pandemic. What specific ideas do you have to address that?
Yeah. So I have to be relentless on this pursuit, because the first thing I will say when taking office is it's my responsibility. It's on my shoulders. If I can't solve this during this term, if I can't address it aggressively, I'm not going to point any fingers, number one. From a structural standpoint, there's a couple of things we want to do. I have neighbors and friends all around me that are compassionate about the issue. They said, I don't like seeing people living in their cars or under bridges, but they don't know their entry point. They don't know what they can do. So what the city of Seattle should do is set up the best infrastructure where everyone knows where they can fit in to solve the problem. If 700,000 people just gave $1, we raised $700,000, right? So number one is we are going to mirror a nonprofit to make sure that we are very aggressive in raising as much money as possible, because at some point you do need more resources. And my wife, who was a former CEO and president of United Way, we've raised, quite candidly, millions of dollars in an effort for health and human services. So we have the ability to do that. Number two, we want to open the data and open the technology and open the infrastructure up such that everyone can know what they can do, whether it's a clothing drive or a food giveaway or helping someone with a resume. We want the city to be known as a city of compassion, and want our children and our grandchildren see us being compassionate. I believe we are a compassionate city. And so what I'm going to do is change the narrative that Seattle collectively will find a way to address the problem aggressively. In addition to that, I'm going to earmark $10 million for each council member. We are by a district setup right now, and I want each of those council members to work very closely with their neighborhoods to find out what their most pressing needs are, whether it's homelessness or open space or public safety. We're going to have a new level of accountability for our city council members and the communities that they serve, a collective effort to make sure we're making the smartest investments in particular communities.
This is the voice of Bruce Harrell. He is a candidate for mayor of Seattle as he joins the Gee and Ursula Show. One of the problems that here on this show that we have discussed, especially in light of 2020 and what we have seen go through in Seattle, has been the lack of communication or working together, if you will, between what I see, the mayor's office, Seattle City Council, and Seattle Police Department. And it always feels as if they weren't on the same page. How will you bridge that gap the same way I'm pretty sure you saw during your playing days at the University of Washington, as you saw three phases of the game, offense, defense, and special teams, have to work together for a common win?
You know, I had a great discussion with a friend of mine. It's Doug Baldwin, who people know from football, of course, and we talk about this because one of the things that a great team does is they genuinely care about their teammate. They will block or tackle or do what's necessary for their teammate. At the end of the day, it's about relationships, and those that have worked with me will know that I'm very aggressive and intentional about building a positive relationship. I would see a writer that would write something awful about me or something that was just untrue, and I'd say, let me understand why you wrote that, and I would go out of my way to have coffee. What the mayor and the city council and the police department need to do is socialize together, informalize the relationship. You can't build relationships, positive ones, in the moment of crisis. So I'll give an example. One of the ideas that I had that was not implemented in a former mayor was to put money in the budget that I put in for our police officers to go down to the playing fields and where kids are playing soccer and football and baseball and just toss a ball around, get to know these kids when they're 9, 10, 11, 12, particularly on the South End. I thought this would be a great idea because I did a lot of youth coaching. And I said, so when these kids get 13, 14, 15, you know a lot of these kids, you know the communities, building a relationship. So what you're not seeing now are those relationships. You see them sniping each other in the newspaper, on talk shows, and no one wins. And I've told them that. No one wins when that occurs. I use an example with the interim superintendent of public schools, Dr. Jones, who will take over when Denise Juneau leaves. And I've been friends for 40 years. And while we may disagree on certain things, we join an academic fraternity together. We're friends, dear friends. Our wives are friends. Can you imagine? I know his intent is pure. He will do a phenomenal job. And when we disagree on policy issues, we will get through it. That's what they have to do, is build the relationships.
Bruce, I want to ask a little bit more about the city council, which, anymore, for me as someone who lives in the city, I don't feel like they represent what it is that I would like to see. I think that they have been listening to a very vocal, maybe it would be a minority, but certainly there's been a lot of emphasis on one end. And I think that there are people, many businesses, who feel like their concerns have not been heard. What can you say as someone who would want to lead the city? How would you make it, where there is kind of more of a balance where right now that the city council makeup is not going to change other than 2 seats. So how would you work with that kind of council?
What I tell people and groups is we have to be aware of a dynamic. And the dynamic is that numerical intense minorities, and I mean by number, not race or other demographics, numerical intense minorities prevail in decision making. So if you have 20 people in a room and you have 2 people that are extremely intent on an issue, they can sway the majority to go a certain way because most people do not like conflict and most people may not be so vested in the issue that they're going to stand up and fight back. So what I do in groups is I recognize that, and I pull sometimes the silent majority into the discussion. How do you feel about that? Is there an alternative way to look at it? And I also make sure that those two people in my hypothetical are understood. So I'll pare back what they said, and then I will immediately focus on the solution, because a lot of the loud voices are in the blame, but they're not on the solution. So I don't have any tolerance for that, quite honestly. And people know that I will let people rant and rave, but I only allow so much of that because I want to burn up the clock on solutions. And we could disagree on solutions, but let's not disagree on whether we're both trying to solve the problem. And quite candidly, I think you need that kind of tenacity, that kind of aggressiveness in a room, because it's not coming from a place of hate. It's coming from a place of love and a place of trying to find a good solution for everybody.
As you took your break away from city politics, and now you're making your run for mayor, and during that time, we just discussed what you have seen and observed. What's the greatest lesson that you've learned, just in general, even about yourself, as you embark on this journey again, back into trying to solve this city's greatest issues?
That's a great question. I think the greatest lesson that I've learned is how easy it is, almost how seductive it is to do nothing when there's so much turmoil around you. Because 8 weeks ago, I wasn't going to run for mayor. 6 weeks ago, I wasn't going to run for mayor. Even though I had this burning desire to see change, I just assumed someone else was going to step up and do it. And I said, I served my term. I gave 12 long years of my life to this city, and it's easy to do nothing. And my wife, who has as much energy, probably more energy than me, said, Bruce, you're sitting around here. You know that there's an opportunity for you to bring a lot of people into City Hall and change the narrative. And I'm not going to be, we've been together over 30 years. I said, I'm not going to be with you 5 years from now, and you're going to look over and say, I should have done this. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be with you, Bruce. We met in college, so she knows me quite well. And I said, you're right. Maybe that was the aha coffee conversation with her. So I learned that, for me, that I love the city so much that I have to do this. And I realized there's so many people, good people, around me that want the same thing. They're starving for what I call not just leadership, but teamwork. They're starving for it. And these are leaders. And people have said, I'm with you, Bruce. That's what said, it's time.
Bruce Harrell, thank you so much for joining us. Great to hear your voice again. And could I ask one big fat favor?
Yes.
You have been on our show before our current Seattle mayor has. If you are elected, can you promise that we'll be able to get you on the show again?
I promise. I hope you're recording this. And as my children say, word is bond.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay, still ahead. We are going to be talking about a state Supreme Court decision that could impact thousands of people who are living in homeless RVs and cars. You are listening to the Gee and Ursula Show.